Okay, we are now at the core, the meat and potatoes, if you would, of personality theories. We are now going to turn our attention to the work of Sigmund Freud. We've already spoke about our good friend Sigmund Freud a few times in the past, and we're now going to focus on a few other of his theories. So Sigmund Freud, in his work, focused a lot on the unconscious drives that define our personalities. And the drives or motives in our personality, according to Freud, were actually rooted in quite aggressive drives. This drive towards either annihilation or destruction, even death, as well as a drive towards sexuality and sexual urges. And Freud said that most of these sexual and aggressive urges are not accepted by society. They are not ones that we can openly and overtly talk about, and so we really push them down and out of consciousness. But meanwhile, they are being worked on underneath the surface. And Freud talked about there being three different aspects of our personality that are oftentimes in battle with each other in terms of the expression of our personality. Freud began with explaining the fact that an infant is born with an id. It's inborn, and we are born with this id, and the id has a gratification that is all about the here and now. He talked about this instant gratification. I want it, and I want it now. So this is why you might find a newborn or an infant basically crying when they want to cry, according to Freud. They want to grab something off of your face, your glasses, and put it in their mouth. That's what they're going to do. Take your cell phone, throw it in the toilet. They don't care. They only want what they want, and they want it now. And in this way, they were driven by the pleasure principle. Whatever they can do to get pleasure, that's what they would seek. This aspect of the personality, as I said, is inborn, and it really plays, it's around from birth, and it's really there alone until the ego comes about. The ego is the reality principle. The reality operates on the reality principle, which basically is what responds to the fact that you can't always get what you want. So there's a famous song by the Rolling Stones. It says, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. And that's basically what the ego does. The ego figures out that I can't get what I want all the time from instant gratification because my adults keep, now they're on to me. They know that when I cry, I'm not just going to get what I want. But I still want things. So the ego comes about using the reality principle and figures out a way to get the id what it needs. So if the mother says you cannot have a lollipop, sorry, that child might run around to their little sister and say, pop, pop. And the little sister might say, oh, that's so cute. You want a lollipop? Sure, I'll get you a lollipop. And she'll give her little sibling a lollipop. Meanwhile, that's not what the mother wanted. But this infant, now this toddler, has figured out how to get what they want in reality. And the ego now has its way of helping out with the personality. Next, we have the development of the superego. The superego operates on the morality principle. And this is where a person develops their morals from. We mentioned earlier the Oedipus or an Electra complex. And it is through the resolution of the Electra and Oedipus complex that a child actually learns their morals, because once they have learned that they can't beat their father in order to, or destroy their father in order to have their mother and to be married or the lover of their mother, they realize that they can't beat their father because they're actually quite like their father. And so, as they say, if you can't beat them, join them. So the child really affiliates and associates with the parent of the same sex, according to Freud, and from that they learn to associate with the morals and principles of that same adult. And that's where the morality principle develops and where the moral compass develops in the superego. Freud mentioned that these are analogous to an iceberg, so that on the top level is the conscious mind, what I'm aware of, and I have some aspects of the ego on top and some aspects of the superego on top, but the id is buried deep beneath the surface, where our unconscious mind rests. And this is where the darker, more aggressive aspects of our personality lie, and this pleasure principle lies, unless the ego and the superego help it come about out of the surface. Freud also talked about the notion of anxiety, and he said that we have conflicts over how we behave, meaning I want to do, part of me wants to do one thing, so my id wants to go out and party and not study for my exam. And my superego says, no, 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 we have to study for the CLEP exam. It's very important that we prepare because we're going to college and have all these rules we have to follow. And so there becomes a battle and anxiety rises up. And so when there's anxiety between the id and the superego, the ego rises up to the rescue. And here ego comes to save the day by developing ego defense mechanisms. All right, these ego defense mechanisms, such as repression or sublimation or denial, is a very famous one, or projection, as we said before. These are mechanisms that the ego uses to protect against all of that anxiety that comes up when there's a battle between the id and the superego, or when there's other types of anxieties that come up. So if I hear bad news, I might say, no, I don't believe it. It can't be true. I'm denying that truth. That's a defense mechanism. Sometimes you even hear people who call on the radio and they win a prize. They call up Z100. You're the 100th caller. You just won tickets to our big concert. And the first thing you hear the person say is, no, I don't believe it. And the DJ says, no, it's true. You really won. No, get out of here. It can't be. They're literally denying because it's too anxiety-provoking that they're a winner. And so they use these defense mechanisms. And there's many other examples of defense mechanisms, but we will only stick with just these few. Okay, psychosexual stages. We already spoke about these in an earlier module at 8.2. So I'm going to ask you to go back there to learn more details. But again, it is the anal, oral, phallic, latent, and genital stages. And we also talked about the electro and edible complex there as well. One thing that I did not mention here, when I told you about the boy who wants to be with his mother or sleep with his mother and kill his father, what actually happens as part of that process of getting over the love for the mother is when he looks at his father and he says, uh-oh, you're a big man. I think you may have it out for me, and you may want to cut off my penis. And that causes castration anxiety. All right, so that's a very famous Freudian term. And the female version of this story is when the woman, the little girl, develops something that we call penis envy, where they envy the fact that the father has male genitalia, and that creates a sense of anxiety. And so she then turns to her mom and says, wait a minute, Mom, Dad has male genitalia, but we don't, right? We're missing that. And so we are like each other, and that's how she associates with the mom, and she develops her superego and her morals and principles from that process. Okay, so let's move on from Freud, as exciting and interesting as it may be, and turn to another approach, and that is the approach of Carl Rogers from the Humanistic school of thought. Carl Rogers, as well as Abraham Maslow, spoke about a person-centered theory. So in this theory, it's very much about giving us the benefit of the doubt. Rather than presuming that we are nihilistic or driven by aggressive urges or sexual urges, Carl Rogers and those in his camp believe that we're not striving to reduce this type of sexual urge and energy and anxiety, but rather we're striving towards congruence. We're striving to match a ideal self, right? My view that I might be in the future over here, this ideal self, what I'd like to be, how can I match that up with my true self? So my true self is my talents, my desires, my thoughts and feelings, and all of that is wrapped up with my self-concept. How do I view myself? How do I, what do I think that I'm like? Not just what actual talents do I have, but what do I think I am, and what would I like to become? And so what he talked about, Rogers, was taking my real self and my ideal self and hopefully having this crossover point here where this is where I'm trying to merge my real with my ideal, and this is what I'm currently am at the current, my true self is right here in this middle. Okay? And the goal is to try to merge those two and overlap them enough so that my ideal is actually what I'm living now. I'm actually living my ideal self. Okay, moving along. Rogers also spoke about the idea of my having a condition of worth, meaning my parents or my caregivers impose upon me a sense of shoulds. You should be this way. You must act in that particular way. It's very important that you have this ideal or this moral or this value. That's what we believe in our family. And so and only if you follow these conditions are you worthy. And if you're not following these rules, you're not worthy. You're not good. You're not desirable or likable to us. And therefore, even to yourself, you should not be proud of yourself if you're not meeting these conditions of worth. And Rogers said that this type of an upbringing is less than ideal, less than healthy. And he proposed that we strive towards a sense of unconditional positive regard, where I am loved and liked no matter what I do. So that I might tell a child, rather than telling my child, you got a 68 on your test? That's terrible. I'm so disappointed in you. I don't even know what I even bother studying with you for. You're just terrible. That's conditional. If they come home with a 95, oh, I love you. You're so brilliant. You're the best child I ever had. You're my son. You're not my wife's. You're my son. You're the smart one. That's me. Right? That's conditional. What Rogers said was that we should strive towards unconditional positive regard. So if a child comes home with a bad exam, or a poor grade, you might say, I'm unhappy with this poor grade. I'm disappointed that you didn't study. And I love you tremendously. And because I love you so much, I need you to know that I have to take away your Xbox because it's not fair that you're not preparing with the right energy because we are putting so much time and effort into helping you and we love you so much. That is a sense of unconditional positive regard. It teaches empathy. Rogers spoke about a sense of genuineness and the value of being genuine with other people and the value of accepting other people even if they don't meet all of your expectations. So you can already see the difference between Rogers and Freud's approach. Rogers was a much more kind of open and accepting approach to explaining personality. Okay, a few more points to make. Another approach is referred to as the social cognitive approach. And this approach talks about how people think about themselves. In other words, how they cognate, how they think about themselves, and then how do they relate to society around them. So it's a social cognitive approach. It's a merging of my self-perceptions and my cognitions and how I relate to everyone else around me and how your perceptions are integrated into my self-concept as well. In this theory, we talk about reciprocal determinism, which is the notion that people and how people think, how people behave, and how they interact with their surroundings and with their environment is what determines how consistent I might be in my personality, how consistent I will be in my behaviors. It's all about this reciprocal determinism. It's almost like you would imagine a circle and each area influences the next and it goes round and around and around. How I think and how I behave and how my environment interacts, how I think and how I behave in my environment, it goes round and around and around. One other concept from this area is cognitive dissonance, the idea that sometimes I might think something and actually behave in a way other than the way I think. So if it's in an election and you vote for someone, even though you're not so confident in that individual, you might experience something called cognitive dissonance. There's a discomfort internally because you're doing something even though you believe in something else. And therefore, people strive to reach a balance by either adjusting the way they think or adjusting the way they behave in order to reach congruence. Okay, we're at the final theory here, and that's the trait theory, otherwise known as the individual difference approach. And in this approach, we are measuring the way people differ based on their traits. Okay, a trait can be something like being shy or outgoing, being very open to experience, or being very closed and protected. We learn a lot about the trait theory from questionnaires that we give people. The most well-known of these trait theories is the Big Five, or the five-factor model. It's also called the five-factor model. And the Big Five is basically a way of trying to understand how do we whittle down personality traits to define us in a limited set of variables. So if you look in the English dictionary, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of words to describe our personalities. And so researchers over time began to take all of those words or descriptors and use a scientific or statistical method known as factor analysis. It's a statistical methodology of reducing down into core factors. And in doing so, they resulted first in 10 personality traits, then another theorist came up with 7, and then eventually the most popular and commonly used trait theory brings us to 5 factors. And they are remembered by the mnemonic OCEAN. And they stand for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So just to give you an example, openness is how open I am to new experiences. Conscientiousness is how mindful I am and conscientious of myself and my environment. Extroversion is how outgoing I might be in terms of my communication. Agreeableness is how well I get along with other people. How well do I communicate with other people? And neuroticism is a bit about anxiety. How neurotic am I? And all this exists on a scale. So you can either be high or low in something. So you can be low or high in a given trait. And that is how we define these 5 traits. And again, this is the final of the 5-factor models. Here's a little image here to show you the different aspects of the 5-trait theory and how they interact to create one's personality. Once again, this was a dense subtopic, so please take your time and review it. And make sure that you practice these concepts, use some mnemonic devices like OCEAN to remember the various aspects of the module, and we'll see you at the next stop.